So today I want to talk about feedback loops, which feedback loops are a self-reinforcing system where the input kind of reinforces itself and the output contributes to the input. So it's kind of just a loop that continues to continue. Whether it's a problem or a solution, it just keeps getting stronger. And there's many, many different types of feedback loops. And today I want to talk about kind of the internal ones and external ones. So first I'll talk about examples of external feedback loops, which I learned specifically about in a wonderful book that I highly recommend called A Future We Can Love, which was based on a conversation between Greta Thunberg and His Holiness the Dalai Lama about climate change. And in this book, they talked about a lot of different examples of feedback loops that are really scary for our climate. In this book, they've also made a series of movies narrated by Richard Gere that talks about these, and they're incredibly well done and helpful and educative. So I'll talk about three of those feedback loops. One is the melting sea ice, and that's where in the polar ice caps, they reflect 85% of the sun rays. So when there's a lot of ice, it reflects that sun and doesn't get warm. But with climate change and warming temperatures worldwide, the snow is melting faster, and as the snow melts, it exposes more ice, which then increases the ice to melt faster, and which exposes more of the ocean. And when more of the ocean is exposed, it then reabsorbs more of that sunlight and gets warmer. And then that kind of feeds the cycle of increasing temperatures in the environment. And yeah, it just gets warmer and warmer and kind of feeds back on itself. Another feedback loop is the clouds. When we have clouds in the sky, they're made of water vapor, which are just kind of water in its gas form. But that's also contributes to trapping heat. And so when there's more heat in the environment, in the air, that warms the oceans, which then create more water vapor. And that water vapor creates more clouds, which then traps more heat. And so again, it just keeps getting warmer and warmer. And then finally, there's the tree loop, where trees and plants remove about 30% of the CO2 in the environment. And so they actually help keep things cool. But with deforestation and development cutting down those trees, especially old growth forests, where we're losing a lot of that. And the more trees that we cut down, the trees contribute to something called transpiration, that when they're kind of breathing, they evaporate moisture from their leaves, and that moisture keeps things cool. And so when we lose that evaporation and that transpiration, it just gets warmer. And so with less trees, there's increased temperatures and it's drier, which leads to an increase of insects and disease, which leads to more fires, which then releases more CO2 and kind of continues the cycle. So watching these videos is quite kind of scary because you see it's a compounding factor with each of these different cycles, each of these different feedback loops. And there's actually many, many more of these feedback loops that are continuing to exacerbate the problem kind of worse and worse. And so that can lead to what I call a negative mental feedback loop, where I learn about this information of climate change in the environment, and I end up feeling hopeless and helpless and overwhelmed and depressed, and so I don't do anything about it. And I try to just ignore the problem, which actually makes the problem worse. And so that's another feedback loop, which is, I think, very common that a lot of people are experiencing. So one of the keys is recognizing that we can do things. We can break these loops. For an example, for the forests, we can protect the forests, which is one of the most important ways of continuing to reduce CO2 because the trees are already doing that. We're trying to come up with all these technologies of how to absorb CO2, but we have these old growth forests that are excellent at doing that. And they don't only provide absorbing the CO2, but they also protect water systems, filtration, wildlife habitat, many, many benefits. And so one thing we can do is to protect those old growth forests. And there's a really wonderful organization called the Rainforest Trust that has already protected over 300 or 30 million acres of rainforest. That's their mission, is just to buy old growth forest and protect it. And it's a really effective, good way. And then they teach local people how to manage and care for those forests. So that's just one tiny example of things that we can do is to help those organizations. We can also plant trees and encourage towns and cities to also plant trees, because if we plant trees in urban areas, that reduces temperatures. It actually makes people happier if they're closer to trees. So there's many, many positive benefits from just having trees around. And so, like I said, a key to breaking these loops, these feedback loops, is recognizing that it's not always a closed system, that there are options and other things that we can do to shift them, and that we can choose kind of what our input is into these cycles, and to also be really clear about what our intention is. So in the mental feedback loops, I think it's a trick of the self-centered thought to just keep circling around about my worries, my problems, and focusing on myself. And so that's a key thing, is breaking out of those mental loops, is thinking about the bigger picture and recognizing that there's a lot more other factors that I didn't consider. And for the environment, there's, for positive feedback loops, we can think about that bigger picture, look at different options, and take those actions. And the more we take actions, then we see there are difference that we can make, and we feel inspired. And then that leads to more actions and more results. We see that at the Abbey as far as our forest work. I mean, you could easily walk through the forest and feel overwhelmed at looking at how thick and nasty it is and be like, oh, this is hopeless. What can I do about this? But we've seen over many, many years and many, many little individual sticks moved one at a time for many, many people. It makes a difference. And we've also seen that with our weeds. We have lots of weeds out of control, but we pick them one by one, doing that action and with many other people, and it makes a difference. And then the more we do it and see others doing it and seeing that we can make a difference, it helps inspire the mind to want to do more. And so there's many things we can do to help the environment and reduce climate change as well. But the important thing is to do it and to have that intention to really help. So now I want to talk about some of the internal mental feedback loops that can also be really dangerous. And I think the negative feedback loops are, in a way, more familiar because they don't take any kind of effort at all. And the mind is just, it takes no thinking. It's just done on habit and just done on automatic pilot. Like I talked about, one of the common ones of feeling overwhelmed, depressed, discouraged, hopeless. What can I do about this situation can tend to lead to taking no action, which then leads to just feeling more depressed, more fear. And that can apply to many different situations in life, whether it's a job situation, relationships, what to do in life. If we have that cycle of feeling overwhelmed and then not taking and thinking that we're right and just staying stuck in that cycle, it just gets worse. Another negative feedback loop that I've seen in myself is feeling insecure and feeling self-doubt. And when I feel that and I believe that, then I avoid things and I withdraw. But that reinforces the belief that there's something wrong with me. And so I withdraw even more, and it cycles around in a very bad way. Another negative feedback loop is attachment and having expectation about how someone should act. And if I have that expectation how they should act, I try to control them and force them to act in that way, which I then get angry, and then they get angry, and then I get fearful. And then that leads me to not wanting to lose the relationship, so I cling on even tighter, and then, again, feeding that cycle of causing harm and a lot of pain. And so all of these come from kind of what I'm calling a closed loop system, where a lot of it's thinking that I'm right and I understand the whole picture completely. And it's ignoring any other factors, any other outputs or inputs, any other options or perspectives. It's just my view. I've really seen how often I so strongly believe in what I'm thinking right now, my experience right now, whether I'm happy and in a good mood, I'm like, oh, everything's good. I can tackle everything. No problem. It's okay. And I have this, this very kind of just naive, like, believing what I'm feeling right in that moment. But then if my mood changes and I get grumpy, I think everything sucks, everything will suck. And I continue to believe that. So it's to me, it's helpful recognizing how strongly I'm just identifying and believing what I'm thinking right now. And I think that's such a perfect example of my ignorance, that it's so not true, because things are changing and I don't have any clue of knowing everything as it is. Fortunately, there are also many positive feedback loops, and I think that's actually really kind of the heart of what Buddhism is working on. I mean, when we cultivate kindness, it feels good in our heart, and that inspires you to want to work more and to be kind again and again. Same with joyous effort. When you put in effort with joy and you see the result, it feels good and you want to do it again. I think this applies to all the 6 perfections, that the more you do it, you see the positive result and you want to do it again. One thing that I've been really enjoying lately is Venerable's been teaching on the qualities of the Buddha from volume 4, and I've been really enjoying this because just taking that time to really imagine what it would be like to not have anger, fear, judgment, clinging, any of the junk that's so normal, and really thinking about what it would be like to have a boundless mind of love, understanding, acceptance. It really helps to kind of shift my mind, and it uplifts it and it feels good. And so I want to kind of keep thinking and imagining what it would be like to do that, or to have those qualities. And I think this is a very powerful practice, because as brain science shows us, that the brain doesn't really know the difference between imagination and reality. And so, I mean, this is a practice that athletes do, is if they want to imagine winning the gold medal, they imagine doing the action again and again. And so it doesn't take much effort to sit on the cushion and imagine what would it really be like to have this love and to be able to act skillfully and with wisdom and compassion and understanding. And so that's a practice that I've been really enjoying, and I think it could make, the more familiar I get with those qualities and that way of thinking, it can make a huge difference in our lives. And kind of the last feedback loop that we see in Buddhism is karma. I think that's kind of an obvious link of seeing a feedback loop, that when we create non-virtue due to kind of the ignorant, self-grasping mind, that creates suffering. And that suffering causes me a lot of times to do more unskillful, negative, harmful actions, and then I suffer more, and it's a downward spiral. But if I can break out of that and think about others, shift my perspective beyond just myself, and cultivate virtuous qualities, virtuous actions, then that brings joy for myself and helps others, and that inspires me to want to do more virtuous activities. So I feel really grateful for the Dharma for having these mind training techniques and kind of breaking out of that closed loop cycle of ruminating and feeding harmful habits. And so I want to kind of keep cultivating that bigger perspective, keep thinking of other options, and thinking of others in different ways. Thinking about this topic of feedback loops made me remember Shantideva's verse from his chapter on joyous effort. And he says, having mounted the horse of an awakening mind that dispels all discouragement and weariness, who when they know of this mind that proceeds from joy to joy, would they ever lapse into despondency. So may we cultivate a mind that moves from joy to joy in helping each other, helping this planet, and moving forward in this life.